Yes.
Yes.
Are we? Well, good morning. My name is Chris Bethel, and I'm head of marketing and client relations at SpectraMedix, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Payments and MACRA Alignment. Before we get started, we need to take care of a couple logistics items. First, your phone has been set to mute to keep down the background noise. Next, you can and are encouraged to ask questions via the control panel in GoToMeeting. We will field as many of these questions as we can, time permitting. And with that, let's get started. On the webinar with me today are my colleagues Tim McIntyre and Mark Rucci. Tim has been part of the New York healthcare landscape for more than 25 years and has spent his career helping payers and providers shape new and innovative ways of operating within the dynamic, ever-evolving healthcare marketplace. He has specific expertise in the New York Medicaid reform area and performance improvement strategies. Mark comes to us with a rich history of healthcare analytics and health plan management experience, a former president and CEO of an ACO. Mark has a deep understanding of value-based payments and the nuances, implications, and opportunities that MACRA presents in a VBP context. As we go over our agenda for today, next slide, please. Today's agenda is pretty straightforward. I'm going to give you a brief snapshot of SpectraMedix, then Mark and Tim will provide you with a primer on New York State Medicaid VBP and the interplay with MACRA. Then they will share with you 3 key areas of alignment that will benefit your organization. In closing, they will briefly discuss next steps, and then we will end with a question and answer session. Along the way, we'll conduct a couple of poll questions to get a bit of feedback from you. Next slide, please. So before we discuss the interplay and implications of MACRA and New York State value-based payments within the Medicaid framework, here's a little bit of information about SpectraMedix. The SpectraMedix mission is simply stated: help payers and providers thrive in the value-based payment world. We do this via a platform specifically designed for healthcare that ensures payer and provider organizations always have access to the right data at the right time so they can optimize their performance improvement efforts. Armed with the right data across all relevant domains, we believe payers and providers can work in concert, participating in mutually beneficial relationships that ultimately mean higher quality patient care at a lower cost, the core of value-based payments. Next slide, please. In order to accomplish this, we've assembled a diverse and highly experienced team that comes from a combination of clinical, analytical, and technology backgrounds, folks that understand your environment and the nuances of healthcare performance improvement in a rapidly changing healthcare payment ecosystem. We provide this to organizations within the Medicaid, Medicare, and commercial domains. Next slide, please. The SpectraMedix platform is a culmination of our team's expertise built into a highly secure, field-validated, and scalable system that manages the healthcare data of millions of lives. It's able to handle a diverse set of structured and unstructured data across multiple systems, create a single source of patient truth and context, calculate and report standard and custom measures, and help drive performance improvement and provide a wealth of population health intelligence. Organizations using the SpectraMedix platform are seeing some tremendous results. Let's have a look. Here are some results from one of our New York clients who, through the Medicaid Delivery System Reform Demonstration Program, or DSRIP, was able to drive down the cost of care while actually improving the care delivered. It's one of many points of validation that a value-based payment system is not only viable, but can have a profound impact on healthcare delivery. We've got a white paper that provides more detail on the project if you're interested. The point is that the right infrastructure and actionable analytics will help accelerate a successful transition to value-based payments. And now, on to our first poll question. Please take a moment and let us know where you are today with New York State Medicaid value-based payments. You might just be learning about VBP, you might have already negotiated contracts, or you might be somewhere in between. We'll take about 30 seconds and let you answer.
That's cool.
Just about 10 seconds left. Okay, are we ready to look at some results here? Excellent. So we have everybody in all kinds of different places, and that's fantastic. This is really going to help shape the presentation that Mark and Tim are going to provide to us. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Mark to discuss New York State Medicaid VBP and MACRA. Mark, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the topic today is to talk about the parameters of the New York State Medicaid VBP program and the federal Medicare MACRA program and how they can become aligned and how that would be to your advantage to do so if you're operating in both environments. First thing is that we want to set some baseline knowledge and make sure everybody understands the terms. MACRA is an acronym for the Medicare Access and CHIP Reauthorization Act. That's a mouthful. MACRA is much easier. I'm sure most of you are generally familiar with it. It does have to do with Medicare's transition to value-based payments for Part B or professional services. It had three major parts. It repealed the prior sustainable growth rate formula that was supposed to be used to dictate percentage increases to the Part B fee schedule every year, but was annually overridden by congressional action because the formula didn't work. It also terminated what were then three existing quality programs, all with different parameters, some with carrots, some with sticks: the EHR Meaningful Use Program, the Value-Based Modifier Program, and PQRS. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with those. MACRA got rid of those programs and replaced them with the Medicare Quality Payment Program, or QPP. So the Quality Payment Program is a fixture within MACRA. We often get questions, what's the difference between MACRA and QPP? MACRA is the larger body, QPP being the payment program within it. As a footnote, MACRA also required CMS to get rid of Social Security numbers and use them for Medicare IDs. That process is underway right now, and I believe they're in the final wave of mailing out to Medicare beneficiaries new ID cards with a new non-SSN ID number on it. So everybody's getting a new ID number, and again, that's in process now, but just about finished. Not really the subject today, but also part of MACRA. So the QPP, as I said, is part of MACRA. It's now the Quality Payment Incentive Program for Medicare Part B physicians. Again, this is only for Part B. Now, QPP itself creates two different paths that physicians may operate under. One is the Merit-Based Incentive Payment System, or MIPS, and the other is what we call Advanced Alternative Payment Models. Very different conditions under the two tracks, and I'm going to explain that as we go to the next slide. So here we have in this slide the Quality Payment Program at the top. Most physicians and other professionals who bill Medicare are subject to the Quality Payment Program. However, clinicians who do not bill more than $90,000 a year and care for more than 200 patients a year are exempt from the QPP. So what Medicare calls low volume physicians. Those who only have a low volume of Medicare do not need to participate. Most physicians do. And then we have the MIPS and the Advanced APM. The MIPS program has 4 different categories of performance with specified metrics and terms, and I'm going to explain all of that as we go. but it creates an annual set of bonuses or penalties based on performance relative to the peer group of the other physicians. So it is a zero-based program. Medicare puts very little money into it. Basically, the losers under the program fund the winners. So the physicians are paying each other. So those who end up on the short side of the stick get a penalty in terms of payments from Medicare, and those who win get a bonus based on the sum of those payments. And I'll explain that more in the next slide. The other side, though, is an advanced APM. If the physician participates in what qualifies as an advanced APM, instead of fighting for money under the MIPS program, they get a 5% bonus on top of their Medicare payments. So in other words, every time they receive a payment from Medicare, whatever the fee schedule is, they get another 5% on top of that every time they submit a claim for a service. So that is much more advantageous to be in a program with only a bonus. Again, the MIPS has a carrot and a stick, and there are those who will actually lose revenue under the MIPS program, not so if you're in an advanced APM. So what is an advanced APM? An advanced APM is an arrangement, a value-based payment arrangement, where there is downside risk, there is performance based on quality, and there is a significant or nominal, more than a nominal amount of risk. So in the current environment, Medicare programs that qualify are the Medicare CPC Plus program, Medicare SSP Tracks 2 and 3, Next Gen ACOs, also the ESRD or ESCO ACOs also qualify. So originally Medicare qualified advanced APMs only in terms of their own initiatives that I just mentioned. However, at this point, they have opened up the qualification for an advanced APM under what they call an all-payer combination or other payer approach, that they will allow a group to qualify as an advanced APM if you're an ACO or an IPA with contracts and you have contracts in Medicare, Medicaid, and or commercial that together meet the conditions of an advanced APM, you can qualify for that under the QPP. So that's good news, is that because many ACOs operate in multiple lines of business. So if you have downside risk on both sides of the fence, you can use those other contracts to qualify as an advanced APM and get your participating physicians access to that 5% bonus. So a number of different programs would qualify, but basically anything in the Medicare, Medicaid, or commercial world, as long as it meets the requirements I'm going to talk about, would qualify as an advanced APM. Now, this slide is the MACRA timeline. There were 3 parts to MACRA, as I mentioned. The first was the sustainable growth rate. That was the formula to figure out how much the Medicare Part B fee schedule would go up or down every year. That is replaced with this timeline, fixed 0.5% increases in fees starting back in 2016 through 19. You will then notice that right now, from 2020 to 2025, there are planned 0% increases. I don't know if that's going to fly when we actually get there. We'll see what Congress does. But at the moment, that's the deal. But the most important part, for those of us who will still be participating in Medicare at this time, starting in 2026, physicians in a qualified advanced APM will get a 0.75% increase every year. Those who are not will get a 0.25% increase. So a 0.5% difference. In 1 year, a 0.5% difference is not that much. Over time, you got to think of that cumulatively from that point forward. At that time, now that's a few years away, admittedly, but at that time, the difference between what those in advanced APMs and those not is going to become huge. 10 years out, that's going to be a 50% difference in pay. We know that HHS has very aggressive goals, as does the state of New York, to move their arrangements into value-based payment. There is a very big incentive right there to get into an advanced APM to get access to those higher fee schedule updates. Now, with regard to MIPS, for those not in an advanced APM, again, there are 4 domains or categories of performance in the yellow bars there. I'm not going to go through all the details of that today. But starting in 2019, physicians can get as much as a plus or minus 4% adjustment to their fees. That goes up to 5, 7, and ultimately to 9%. Now, the years that I've given there starting in 2019, those are the payment years. The performance that dictates whether those payments are positive or negative adjustments is 2 years prior. So the 2017 performance year, which was just closed, is going to dictate whether physicians get plus or minus 4%, and that's up to 4%. It was actually a little less than that. We'll go through all those things. But again, the losers are paying for the winners. So the pot of bonuses is created by the pot of the doctors who have to pay penalties. It is a cost-neutral program to Medicare, with one exception. There is a special bonus for what they call exceptional performance, to which Medicare puts in $50 million a year. But that is the sum total of their contribution. The doctors are paying each other generally under that program. So if you're successful, that can be a significant increase to your income, but you've got to play that game and you've got to fight and scratch for your money. Alternatively, if you qualify for an APM, you get a 5% bonus without having to fight. There's no loss side or no negative side to that. You're excluded from having to participate in MIPS. You don't have to file all the paperwork and the measures to get a score. You instead just get a 5% bonus. And you also get access to those higher fees starting in 2026. So there's a lot of benefits to being an advanced APM. Okay, this slide again, the top half just summarizes what I just said. You're excluded from MIPS. You get the 5% bonus. Now, in addition to that, your contract or your plan or your ACO can qualify as an advanced APM. However, all of the providers in your ACO may or may not also individually qualify. There is a separate set of requirements that they have a significant volume of their business into your advanced APM. So if they sign up with your group, but they only have 10 members attributed to them, and that's less than 1% of their business, they're not going to qualify as being participating sufficiently. So there are rules currently in the all-payer combination, which we're talking about now. Right now, the rules are that there are 2 ways to qualify. In 2018, if the physician has 25% of their payments through an advanced APM, they would qualify. Or if 20% or more of their patients are in an advanced APM. Now those numbers, and I have those numbers here on the slide, those numbers do increase over time. For instance, next year in 2019, the threshold becomes 50% of payments and 35% of patients. Ultimately, in 2022, the increase maxes out at 75% of payments or 50% of the patients. So again, you can see, consistent with Medicare's aggressive move to value-based payments, they're highly incenting you to qualify as an advanced APM, which means you're taking on downside risk of a significant amount, and your physicians are participating at the level where very significant percentages of their business are in advanced APMs. This is not an easy threshold to meet. Medicare wants to get to the point where more folks are in the taking downside risk than not. Right now, it's a very small portion of the pie, but there are huge incentives to get where CMS wants everybody to go. So, given that background of MACRA and the QPP and what it means to be an advanced APM, I'm going to hand it over to Tim at this point, who's going to talk about New York State Medicaid side of the equation.
Got that chart? Are you doing that chart? Good afternoon, everyone. Can we just advance one more slide? Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to cover the New York State Medicaid Value-Based Program. First of all, the big difference from what Mark was going through on MACRA is that this is a Medicaid program, yet it is an offshoot of the 5-year DSRIP program by New York State. And the overlap with the federal program is that the New York State DSRIP program roadmap had to be submitted and approved by CMS. Just a little background on the DSRIP program in New York. It was a $9 billion incentivized program based on performance. It started in 2015 and will end at the in the beginning of 2020. So we are now in the last year, what they call the last measurement year, number 5. In terms of performance, the first 2 years were based on setting up the PPSs, provider performance systems, and pay for reporting. Then in measurement year 3, it converted to pay for performance over 44 different projects to enhance the performance of quality scores within providing clinical care, not necessarily on a cost basis. One of the intended goals of the entire DSRIP program, not only in New York, but in a dozen other states, was to set the table to move to value-based payments at the end of the program and into 2020. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. The whole value-based Medicaid and DSRIP programs, not only in New York but other states, evolves around the triple aim, which is obviously to improve performance in terms of quality and a reduction in cost or gained efficiencies, and improving the overall patient experience in the delivery of healthcare. The value-based program that New York has rolled out certainly is based around the improvement of quality and the reduction of cost and efficiency. In terms of structure, the program is based upon contracting value-based contractors, which are made up of ACOs, IPAs, can involve CBOs, and integrated delivery networks. They then must contract with the MCOs, who are really the lead in terms of managing over $22 billion of Medicare spend in New York. So the MCOs will negotiate the contracts with the contractors and then provide those contracts into New York State for review and acceptance. DOH has set a guidance around the value-based program system for New York with some suggested measures and qualifications, yet they are not prescribed. They are guidelines for the MCOs and the contractors to work within. There's really just one stipulation is that there must be one measure in terms of category 1 that is used in the arrangements. Can we go to the next slide, please, Lorraine? Okay, in terms of timing, as I mentioned, DSTRP started in 2015. We're at the tail end of that. And as the program moved towards the last 2 years, it started to set the table for value-based payments. And it started with some pilot programs in 2016 and 17. There was about 12 pilot programs between some of the PPSs, the managed care organizations, and some of the partners. But really the key outcome that DOH and CMS wants to get to is by the year 2020 to have a minimum of 80% of the Medicare spend, again that $22 billion, to be under value-based payments. There, as I'll indicate in the next slide, there are different levels of value-based payment. There are 3 levels. So under that 80%, they would like to accomplish 35% to be under level 2 and 3. And there is, in 2019, it's a step forward to 50% of the expenditures being in level 1 and 15% being contracted in level 2 and 3. Right? Thanks. These are the various levels for risk. Level 0 has really been how the market's been operating in the past, which is basically performance bonuses. That's going away, and really we move into level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 is where there's an upside-only shared savings between the managed care organization and the value-based contractors. Level 2 has risk sharing on the upside and the downside between the contractual partners. And then level 3 is really capitation, shared between the MCO, fixed capitation, and the contractors. And we'll see shortly how that aligns with some of the other programs in MACRA. Next slide, please, Larry. In terms of arrangements, there are really 2 groups of suggested guideline arrangements under New York value-based payments. There's the general population, where we have total care at a cost basis. And then there is integrated primary care, which is measured quality and cost on an episodic basis. Then we have some subpopulation, behavioral health, ARP, HIV/AIDS, maternity care, which is also episodic, managed long-term care, and then several other smaller subpopulation groups. Again, these are just guidelines that DOH has provided. At the end of the day, it will be the terms that are negotiated by the managed care organization and the value-based and the contractors. Okay, so let's dive into kind of the overlap between, or the alignment between, New York value-based payment program and MACRA. The first place to start is really with the measures. So if we take a look at the New York value-based DOH suggested measures, as we talked about in those various 4 arrangements, and overlaid those with the measures also in MIPS, you see a significant overlap. Now, of course, what's key here is in both cases, they're not prescribed, they're recommended. So you could have a subset of these in your MIPS program that you've selected, or in value-based, you may also negotiate a subset within those measures. Obviously, if you're playing in both arenas, you want to identify where your best opportunity is across those measures as a subset, not only working with MIPS or advanced payment models, but also with value-based care, value-based payment in New York Medicaid. Sorry, that's good. So with that, I will turn it back to Mark, who will start to overlay a little bit on the advanced payments.
So just to finish off the measure selection, both VBP and MIPS have a menu of measures to select from, and there is overlap as we showed on the previous slide. if you're careful and coordinate your contracts, it's possible to get 100% alignment between the two by selecting the overlapping measures only. Of course, that's going to be advantageous to you to keep your focus of your organization on a lesser number of measures. Also, of course, administratively simpler and more advantageous. So on to reason number 2. Now, again, the alignment. We talked about the other advanced APMs and all the benefits of becoming one. So what does that have to do with New York State VBP? It is possible that your VBP contract can qualify as an other payer advanced APM. Not all of the contracts signed under that VBP will, but if they meet the following requirements, they will. So the requirements to qualify as an other payer or non-Medicare advanced APM is there needs to be a minimal amount of marginal risk. That is the percentage of claims or losses that the ACO is responsible for. A minimum loss rate is the amount of losses that will trigger shared losses, and then most importantly is the total amount of risk in the contract. They want to look at the fact that in the end that there's a significant amount of risk there. So if you signed a contract that said you were at risk for the first $10 and then not anything after that, that would not qualify as an advanced APM. There's not enough risk there. So in terms of those parameters, we go to the next slide. The rules are that the minimum marginal risk must be 30% or more. So if we look at, again, VBP level 1 is upside only. So an upside only contract would never qualify as an advanced APM. A level 2 contract has up and downside and could qualify as an advanced APM. If you see the lower box there, however, the New York State VBP requirements to be a level 2 arrangement is that at least 20% marginal risk. So depending on whether you have more or less than 30% marginal risk may qualify. If you have less than that, we'll see. The other parameters are the total risk must be a minimum of 3% of expenditures under the program. So you have to be at risk for up to 3% of the total expenditures or the target budget. The other way that can be done is or 8% of the actual revenue to your providers. Assuming that your providers are not giving 100% of the care, your providers are only going to be a fraction of the total expenditures for your assigned population. So there's a rule either way, either 3% of expenditures. So the point is that there must be significant risk before it qualifies as an advanced APM. So you're looking at least a marginal risk of 30%. That means that you share in losses and savings 30-70. Most contracts are 50-50, but they don't have to be. You've got to take at least 30% of the risk. And then the total risk has to be 3% or more of expenditures. So those are the most important requirements. The other things to qualify as an advanced APM is there must be a use of certified EHR technology. MACRA recently changed that so that 50% of the participants in your group, if they're using certified EHR technology, that will qualify. New York State VBP doesn't have a requirement in that area, so there is no overlap there. Now, the quality measures we talked about already. Again, they must be incorporated on both sides. There needs to be quality. They do not have to be the same measures. They have to be comparable, is the term used by Medicare. Of course, the more actually used MIPS measures, the better. But you need to use measures in your VBP that are comparable to MIPS, and there's a further requirement that at least one of the measures be outcome-based. So you've got to look at the measures you're using and the amount of financial risk to see if you qualify as an advanced APM.
Thank you, Mark. Next slide, then. I think we talked about that. One more. All right. So obviously, in terms of aligning value-based, New York value-based pay models with MACRA, New York DOH, because it did submit the roadmap with CMS and negotiated that, both organizations are trying, not just in New York, but across the country, to start to better align these value-based payment models across the Medicaid, Medicare, as well as the commercial marketplace. Obviously, in terms of New York, it does provide a significant opportunity. It can optimize your results and payments across both programs where there is significant overlap based on your performance. It certainly will save time and resources, in essence, killing two birds with one stone. And be prepared. It allows you to be prepared for the advancement of both programs over the next decade. Next slide. So in terms of next steps, we can go to the next slide. Mark has reviewed the MACRA timeline, and we also talked about the value-based. 2019 and 2020 is going to be very important years in both of these programs. So Lorraine, if you go to the next chart. Even though in New York value-based, there's the beginning of value-based program contracts taking place now. The majority will be under the 2020 goalpost or goals that we'd like to reach, again, with 80% of the contracts being under value-based payments. But you really need to start now. This is not an effort that is lighthearted. So if you look at taking back from April of 2020, you really need to be starting now to set the table for negotiations for value-based payments, as well as now in 2019, obviously in advanced payments. That's a very important year also. So you really want to rally around where your best performance opportunities and cost reduction opportunities are in your business. So if we just take this example, really we need to start to acquire the data sources, do your benchmarking, do a what-if contract modeler, and then move into successful contract negotiations for those contracts to be submitted to DOH by the managed care organization. There's really kind of two types of contracts, what we call on-menu and off-menu. If you're following somewhat of the DOH guidelines, we kind of call that the on-menu type, which will take less of a review and scrutiny from DOH. But if you're doing a more customized off-menu arrangement, DOH will be looking a lot closer to that. And next slide. So if you take the kind of the do your homeworks part of the chart that we just talked about, we kind of break it up into two areas. One is pre-contract activities and then post-contract performance. And obviously, if you're moving towards the negotiation table, there's some homework that you have to do. You really need to step back and look at 3 years of your baseline performance, not only in terms of quality, but in cost. You then look at those various measures or arrangements and see where you best perform, and then onward to setting a target budget, which you feel you can perform against. But just as important, though, you need to also consider and align that with your managed care partner to see what their goals and objectives are in terms of value-based payments. So we created a kind of what-if modeling that allows you to optimize that type of performance review and program. Okay, good. I think that's on that slide. Okay, all right. Next slide.
Here we go.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you. So next steps, I think hopefully we've been able to identify the opportunity for you. Really, in terms of the next steps is do it, because there is a tremendous amount of opportunity and alignment between the two programs. Doing it right, as you can see, there's a lot of homework that needs to be done to provide your selection of measures and your contracting. And obviously, you need to start it now. Thank you. I think, Chris, we're ready to move to the second poll.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark and Tim. And yes, it's time for another poll question. And this one is, does your organization intend to pursue alignment of its New York State Medicaid VBP and Medicare QPP programs? So we're going to take about 30 seconds again and let you answer. And about 10 more seconds. All right, Lorraine, you want to put up the results there? Okay, excellent. Tim, Mark, any thoughts on the responses?
We're having a little technical difficulty here, Chris.
Okay, well, it looks like, I mean, the vast majority are either will or are not sure. There's about 10% that probably or definitely will not do it, but the biggest group is either still on the fence or will probably head that way, which is good to know, and hopefully this webinar has been an assistant to help you kind of get some clarity on that. So with that, speaking of clarity, I have Lorraine assisting me today with questions. Lorraine, does the audience have any questions for the panel?
Yes, we have two questions. The first is, I have entered into a level 1 VBP arrangement. Will that qualify as an other payer advanced APM?
Okay, I'll take that. Now, a level 1 New York State VBP arrangement is an upside only arrangement. Because there is no downside risk, by definition, that would not qualify as an advanced APM. Must have downside risk, and that downside risk must be greater than or equal to the minimum thresholds that I summarized earlier. So no, that would not qualify.
All right. Next question. If my VBP contract qualifies as an other payer advanced APM, will all of my ACO participants qualify for the 5% bonus?
Okay, as I mentioned earlier, the answer is not necessarily. Once your contract or ACO arrangement is qualified as an advanced APM arrangement, the individual physicians will qualify only if a significant portion of their practice is under that arrangement or combination of arrangements. Again, there is a set of requirements that is growing by year, and currently in 2018, there has to be at least 25% of the practice's payments or 20% of their patients through an advanced APM for them to qualify and be eligible for that 5% bonus. Those percentages rise over time and max out in 2020 at 75% of revenue or 50% of the patients. So depending on the percentage of each practice that is invested into your advanced APM contract, they may or may not qualify. If the physicians are in your APM but don't qualify, they would go back to MIPS and be subject to the MIPS requirements and still be able to earn a bonus, but they need to fight for it back on the MIPS side of the equation.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And that's really all the time we have for questions. If there's other questions that were submitted, we will get to you separately with those particular questions. I want to thank Mark and Tim for their participation, Lorraine for helping and coordinating this, and to all of you for attending the webinar today. Please feel free to contact us directly or check us out at SpectraMedix.com, and have a terrific rest of your day.
Somebody, if it's worth